Hello all, this is Joshua Johnson.
What's up, everyone? This is Tommy Kellogg.
So Tommy, tell me, how did we meet?
Good question, Josh. We actually met as students at Yeshiva University, where we both received a master's degree in Jewish studies. During that time, we both had the passion and idea to create some sort of outlet for our interest in Jewish-Christian dialogue. And through that, we thought a podcast would be a great platform.
Indeed, in this podcast, we discuss the historic and modern intersection of faith and culture, rooted in the common heritage of the Abrahamic faith. We have deep discussions with people who are active in their faith communities and building bridges between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and our shared connections to the Holy Land.
Welcome to Embracing Abraham. All right, so welcome to the Embracing Abraham podcast. I am Tommy Kellogg.
I'm Joshua Johnson.
Today we have an awesome guest and friend of mine, Ryan Lambert. Ryan is the director of the Bridge Builders Forum, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering understanding between Jews and Christians regarding their faith and the Bible. And I do have some history with Ryan. I actually met Ryan by, I think, just cold calling, essentially, or emailing, because I heard him on a podcast about a year ago, maybe. Is that right, Ryan?
Yeah, something like that. I think that's
maybe
right. Yeah,
maybe a little more.
about a year ago.
We just hit it off, and he has a heart that's very similar and in line with what we really want to accomplish here on Embracing Abraham, and that's really bringing unique stories, Jews and Christians, together, and really trying to understand in the context at times of the Bible and at other times just interpersonally, right? And so we really appreciate you coming on, and I was so excited to have you on. So I would say, if you don't mind, Ryan, just like start with telling us a little bit about yourself, and you can kind of get into wherever you'd like to go, and then we're all excited to hear. So.
Awesome. Well, hey, Tommy, thank you so much for having me. Joshua, it's great to be on here with you as well. As Tommy said, I've gotten to know him quite well over the last year. We've had a lot of meetings and phone calls, and just kind of, he's been also very involved in helping in various ways with Bridge Builders Forum, and I'm really grateful for your friendship, Tommy and Joshua.
Likewise.
Looking forward to this conversation. So, yeah, like you said, Tommy, in your intro, I am the director, founder and director, co-founder, along with my wife, Kara. We founded the Bridge Builders Forum, which is an organization dedicated to helping Jews and Christians better understand their faith, the Bible, and each other. So that's our mission, and that's our heart. Very grateful that we have both Jews and Christians in our audience. I would say the majority of our focus or the majority of our content and focus is more on the Christian side. But again, we do have a lot of Jewish people in our audience as well, and so and that's really in many ways, the Bridge Builders Forum is not about it's not the Ryan Lambert teaching organization or anything like that, but in many ways it's also a culmination of my journey and my wife's journey. And we're both Jewish. We both grew up in Jewish households, different kinds of Jewish households, but for me personally, I grew up in the Baltimore, Washington area. Was had a bar mitzvah when I was 13, Hebrew school, very typical American Reform Jewish upbringing. And the way I kind of like to tell my stories, it's kind of, I go by decades, just to keep it brief. And of course, life is never as neat as we remember it to be, or maybe not. But anyway, in my 20s, I actually became an evangelical Christian in my 20s. And so, so that was, so I'm 50 now. So, that's kind of certainly was really a wonderful and very, important part of my journey. Like many Reform Jewish kids, after my bar mitzvah, my sense of connection to Judaism, sadly, really became almost non-existent. And then I, in college, I was around a lot of Christians, and just kind of long story short, was wanted to have a relationship with God, and Christianity was presented to me, and I thought it was beautiful and made sense, and it resonated with me. And so I essentially, in my 20s, I was a Baptist. And again, I even though that doesn't reflect my current community or sort of outlook, worldview, and all that, currently I actually am part of an Orthodox Jewish synagogue. But that was a wonderful decade and period of my life, because I learned so much, and I saw just the wonderful things that the church is doing. And even though, again, saw some difficult things, some things that I don't agree with, but I learned, got a seminary degree, and really developed my decade, let's just say, in evangelical Christianity. It really gave me a love for the Bible, and it gave me a love for just worship and things like that. And so that was really, really important. But like a lot of people who are Jewish and become followers of Jesus, however they want to put that, messianic, my journey, had twists and turns to it. And so I made my way through into the actual Messianic Jewish movement, served in various capacities, like professionally in the Messianic Jewish movement as well. And again, another like really important, great experience. And again, I have respect for every stop that I've, sort of in my journey, or each of these decades. And now we're in my 30s with sort of the Messianic movement. I've learned a lot. I have great respect for it. And then in my 40s, I've really gotten much more connected to the Jewish community. And I'm, as I said, my wife and I, we now attend an Orthodox. We're not, our lifestyle and our observance level is not Orthodox, but we're part of an Orthodox community that's very diverse. Some of your listeners are probably familiar with Chabad. We go to a local Chabad, and that's been a wonderful experience. So but along that, people want to say, well, are you still a follower of Jesus? And that, and I am. I'm Jewish. My religion is Judaism. I'm part of the Jewish community. And I maintain allegiance to Jesus, absolutely. But again, but for me, that is very much just connected to who I am as a Jew. And the way I like to put it, is that I wouldn't be, if not for my journey with Jesus, like I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing today. And in many ways, I look at the message of Jesus in the Bible and in the Gospels. Jesus was calling Jews, first and foremost, he was calling Jews back to the God of Israel. He was calling them back to the Torah. He was calling them back to a right understanding of a Torah that prioritized, justice, mercy, faithfulness, love, these kinds of things. And I would say, that's in many ways, my journey with Jesus brought me back to the God of Israel and to the religion of Jesus, which was Judaism. So that's just a little bit of my personal story that kind of has, so with all of those stops, our journey, the winding, twisting road, it's given me in particular, and my wife as well, a great passion for bridge building. And that is for helping, again, using our experiences and our journey, not to necessarily, replicate that in other people, but to use that to help people, whether they're Jewish or whether they're Christian, but they see the importance of the Jewish-Christian relationship. And I would say also within sort of that, so what we're talking about here is what we do is called Jewish-Christian relations. That's what Bridge Builders Forum is really all about. And I think that, we're sort of, we're positioned because of our experience and because of what we've learned along the way to help, both Jews and Christians better understand each other. And within that passion, then I'll come up for air here in just a minute. Within that passion, and that calling, I would say, we have a real heart, especially to help Christians to forge a better path with the Jewish people, and to challenge replacement theology and to learn really what it means to stand against anti-Semitism and with the Jewish people and without ulterior motives. And then if we want to even dig further into that, I'm of course really big on the Apostle Paul and understanding him from a Jewish perspective and really reframing Paul as a bridge builder between Jews and Christians, as opposed to the bridge burner that really he's been framed as really for most of the past 2,000 years. So all that to say, that is my story. I have no choice but to stick to it, and I'm proud of it. And here we are, and I'm just grateful to be here with you for this time.
I have so many questions.
I have two really quick. All right, Joshua, before I forget. I have them written down because I don't want to forget. Okay, so my first question is, I know you're a Braves fan, right?
Oh, yeah.
So if you're from Baltimore, how did you end up a Braves fan? If you're,
it's a great question. So I'm still I still bleed a little bit of orange, Baltimore Oriole orange, if you prick me. But yes, I moved to Atlanta grew up in the Baltimore, Washington area. All my family's from Baltimore on my mom's side, but everybody's from Maryland on my dad's side too. And so I grew up in the Baltimore, Washington area, grew up a big Orioles fan. But then in 1998, I moved to Atlanta right after college. So
those were good years for the Braves, right? If I remember.
Those were great years.
Was 97 the World Series?
I moved to Atlanta in the height of like the Braves, all those pennants they were winning, Maddox, and I was a huge baseball fan. Anyway, we could totally let this conversation just go in the baseball direction. I'll be fine with that.
Yeah.
But no, seriously. And that does connect. American Jews love baseball. So there is a connection here. And I actually mentioned that in my book subtly. But anyway, all that to say, I moved to Atlanta in 98. I was already kind of a Braves fan, but now I'm like full throttle Braves fan. Went to the game last night. Braves are having a good year. Yeah. But I will stop there so that we can talk about what you technically
that's all part of it, man. It's all part of it.
Part of the story.
So I know I saw some stuff about your Braves fandom, and I was like, I gotta ask this guy.
Oh, yeah.
Just curious. So very cool. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure.
I could talk about sports all day.
Did you have a second one, a follow-up?
Yeah. So not related to sports. And you maybe mentioned it as you were speaking, but I was sort of thinking about it and the idea. So, you mentioned how you grew up Reformed and then you became evangelical in your 20s and kind of came back around to Judaism in a very unique way. So, and then you turned this whole thing culminating today to this Bridge Builders, to you and your wife, and like really trying to grow that. And I think is a really extremely beautiful thing. And how you do it, it's very impactful. And so,
well, thank you.
Yeah. So the question though is, was there like a time where my brain keeps thinking the word intersecting, the two, Judaism and Christianity, kind of intersected, because you almost shared it like you had one, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had one stage Judaism, one stage Christianity, and one stage like a different aspect. But this idea of like how they did they always sort of intersect in a way, or was it like even when you became evangelical, did you still have this framework of Judaism within that kind of hovering around? Or was it like complete, like you did, like you know what I mean?
You're
like,
talking about for me personally, right?
For you personally, yes. For you personally.
Yeah. And again, that's part of even, some of the things I really try to be careful with is like, I've got my own, everybody's got their story, right? Everybody's got their own story. And I think that's part of the thing we have to do in bridge building is respect everybody's story. And where it's like, where are you now? And what are you about? Like that's, and how I got here is, it's complicated. It's messy. But that's just life in the real world. And so I understand complicated and messy, and that's just the nature of it. Okay. But all that to say, interestingly enough, I mean, I would, when I was, I spoke very positively and very sincerely about those, that season of life when I was in the evangelical Christian world. When I say in it, I mean, so much of what I do every day today is interact with and engage with evangelical Christians. So it's like relationally, I am still very connected to the evangelical world and love that. Speaking evangelical churches all the time, but I'm not a part. I don't self-identify as an evangelical Christian because I'm not. I don't self, even though again, I maintain allegiance to Jesus. I don't identify as a Christian at all, because a Christian goes to church and is part of Christianity, and there's certain things that mean that doesn't represent me any more than I would say in ancient times it represented Paul, but that's a whole nother thing. All that to say, in my 20s, during that season when I was in evangelical Christianity, I mean, I learned the Bible, and I learned about Paul, and I learned about Jesus, and I even learned about, you know, what Christians refer to as the Old Testament. You know, I learned it from Christian sources. And even a lot of the things I learned about Jews and Judaism, even though I grew up in the, you know, I had a bar mitzvah. Like, it wasn't like had no Jewish education. But I learned really, when I got serious about these kinds of things, it was when I was in the Christian world. And so on the negative side, during that decade, I inherited and learned a lot of things about the relationship between Jews and Christians, the relationship between Judaism and Christianity that I no longer hold to. And so a lot of what I would say is part of the sort of the replacement paradigm. Those were ideas that I inherited and learned, such as the new covenant has replaced the old covenant. You know, the gospel has replaced the law. Sunday replaces the Sabbath. You know, the Old Testament sacrifices have been replaced by the sacrifice of Jesus. You know, Saul the Jew became Paul the Christian. All these kinds of things that are just a very, again, that doesn't mean all Christians believe those things, but those are standard narrative and theological features of mainstream Christianity. And those were things that I learned and in many ways embraced. But then again, over time, as I was learning, growing, studying, pressing in, questioning, I came to some different conclusions about every one of those ideas. So all that to say, and over time, I came to see, I guess, to kind of where your question was going, is that at least at the beginning, you know, I don't think Paul or any of the apostles themselves, and certainly not Jesus, ever envisioned that the Jesus movement would become an entity, a movement, a community divorced from Judaism and the Jewish people. I just don't think the texts themselves actually, point in that direction. Now, in the reception of those texts and as the generations went on, things began to change, and there was certainly a parting of the ways. But I think ultimately, especially when we talk about Paul was interested in joining the ways between Jews and Gentiles, but Paul's interpreters, as the generations went past, saw things, I think, very differently than Paul did. And ultimately, we had, Christianity really defining itself as something very different than Judaism, really seeing Judaism as the ultimate other. And really, Judaism became the foil of Christianity and defined itself, as the replacement of Christianity. And in many ways, that mindset is still held by many, but that is changing, and that there is, a significant move in the Christian world to try to correct some of those ideas, to respect the differences between Jews and Christians, which I think is actually inherent to the New Testament itself. I mean, I think Paul even was encouraging such a respect for different convictions, even within his letters. But the point is that certainly, things parted. But I think, again, the beautiful thing that we see happening in our time is that many Christians are seeking to see the importance. Well, they're seeking to see that really the Christian faith was never designed to exist apart from a positive relationship with the Jewish people and with Judaism. And so that, that is something, again, I think that many Christians are trying. I think that is an important theological connection, and it has tremendous relational implications as we think about the relationship between Jews and Christians today. So Tommy, that was a long answer to your
Yeah,
question, but
great answer.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a great answer. I think it's also just, for people who don't know Joshua's and I's story, we met as a cohort at a private Jewish university in
Yeah, it's amazing.
New York City, right? And this idea, I don't remember if Josh was in the class or not, but we was listening to, so a lot of almost all of our professors were Jewish, right?
Yeah,
And one of them was saying to us in our cohort, along with we had a cohort and then we had other Jewish people in the class too. So we were kind of intermixed. And he was saying how, I think if I remember right, he was saying, hey, like, not even 50 years ago, this would have been like unreal.
Yeah.
Like people would not, like a Christian in a setting in
Sure.
America and of this nature, it just wouldn't happen, And so kind of to your point, I think there is a slow contingency of people, right? I don't know if it's ever going to become mainstream, maybe, but this idea of like the crossing over, right? And sort of maybe my question too for you was, where did you ever have a crossover of like where did it become important in your mind, the Jewish Christian relation thing? Because I think maybe you said maybe into your 40s once you began Bridge Builders, but it sounds like it was sort of building the whole way, right? Your whole story kind of leads to this, right?
Yeah. Well, I think so. You're asking when did sort of I personally get interested in Jewish Christian relations? Well, and as you said, I think that you noted an important historical marker in that 60 or 70 years ago. So let's just say my grandfather couldn't have imagined that there would be the kind of Christian today that loves Israel, loves the Jewish people, and loves Judaism, and like has a real respect for it. I mean, there was no. I mean, there were people, there were individuals, because we have writings, of people who wrote things that maybe some or all of those things were true, but I mean, we have a movement basically of people that feel that way and see things that way, of Christians that see things that way. And a lot of that has to do, we sort of the big historical marker is the Holocaust, right? So we sort of like look at the history of Jewish Christian relations. I mean, really, when we talk about the history of Jewish relations, we got to go all the way back to the first century, right? And so because that's where it starts. And so it's a fascinating and very important history, but for the most part, that history was defined largely by hostility and distance. But when the Holocaust happened, it really was a watershed for many reasons. But one thing is that it gave at least some Christians and many denominations, it gave them pause to think, okay, what did we do to potentially contribute to that? And so you have, shortly after the Holocaust, you have various efforts that emerge that were starting to engage in Jewish Christian dialogue and Jewish Christian relations. And then you have statements coming out, even within a couple years of the Holocaust, the 10 points of Seelisberg, which nobody knows about, but it was, again, this is a Christian statement that was trying to take ownership for basically Christian anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. And then, of course, famously in the 1960s, you have, Vatican II, and Nostra Aetate comes out, and you have the Catholic Church that, makes this monumental, statement regarding, is it really their first statement, official, encyclical type statement about the Jewish people. And it was positive. It was really positive. It was a watershed. It was groundbreaking. So that's really what has sort of created what we have now, which is, we have an entire movement, an entire, sort of an entire category that we call Jewish Christian relations or Jewish Christian dialogue. Jewish Christian dialogue and relations are, a little bit different, but they're certainly related. As far as, again, when it comes to my own, sense of involvement in this. It's been a process again, that, coincided with my own personal story. But I would say that for me personally, I'm very, as a Jew, who is very involved in the Jewish community, like I feel very called to Jewish Christian relations, because again, I have this journey, and because of my experience and being and learning the New Testament and learning Christian theology as an insider, in Christian circles and Messianic circles, I feel very dedicated to using those experiences and that knowledge, and the years of research and study and education, really in many ways for two things. One, I want to be a defender of the Jewish people because they're my people, and I love, and I, just the theological significance of the Jewish people, and then just also that's who I am, and that's the community God's called me to be a part of. But then also I have Tommy and Joshua, I have a great love for the church. Like I developed because I was in it, and because I still have a connection to it, and because, of all the things that I'm saying, like I care about the church. I care about Christians and Christianity. And I'm persuaded that Christianity cannot be all that it's designed to be. And let's just say the church, the ecclesia, the body of Christ, however we want to put it, not only will not, but cannot be all that it's designed to be, and cannot flourish without a positive relationship to the Jewish people and to Judaism. Okay. And so I think that, again, for all those reasons, I know that's a lot, but that's why I am dedicated personally. I'm dedicated to Jewish Christian relations. So that's kind of my heavy duty, theological, but very heartfelt answer. But also here's another level. It just makes the world a better place, right? It makes the world a better place when Jews and Christians, I mean, I'm committed. Certainly my particular interest and focus, for all the reasons I just said, is in Jewish Christian relations. But I love to see all kinds of different groups and interfaith relationships being promoted, because it's, first of all, we can learn from each other, and, it brings tikkun olam, it brings healing, and we don't all have to agree on things, and I can learn from different people. Anyway, so I think I answered your question, at least to the best of my ability.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and I think it reminds me.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Josh.
No, I'm just gonna say we must be like in the days of the Messiah, because on the way here on the train, behind me I was hearing two young college students, a boy and a girl. The girl was Christian and the boy was Jewish, and she was telling him about her church experience and relationship with Jesus, and then they decided that they were gonna switch. They were gonna each attend each other's service. He was gonna take her to a synagogue, and she was gonna take her to take him to church. So it's it's happening on the ground. Like it's not. It
is
even what we're doing. It's not. It's already beyond us.
But that's so important, and I love that. Thanks for sharing that. And that's happening in so many different ways and areas, and that's awesome.
I wanted to ask also about your personal background. So you go to Chabad, and I'm just curious, like when you go there, do you present yourself, like do you tell them about your background? Do they know your affiliation with Jesus, and how does that
it's funny.
go?
A lot of people want to have that question. Well, what does Chabad think? Well, first of all, let me just be 1,000% clear. Like Chabad in no way endorses Jesus, as that is not a Chabad. They don't endorse Jesus or the New Testament or anything like that. Chabad is very open-minded towards Jews of all kinds of backgrounds, and that's the beautiful thing. We could talk a little bit more about that. So, but again, Kara and I, my wife, we're not there. We're there just to be a part of the Jewish community. And so to answer, I've been a part of my personal Chabad, the Chabad I'm a member of. I've been connected to it for 15 years. I've been like really part of the Minion and been a member for the past 5 years. But so we're very, very involved, and honestly, like, so the leadership there, the two rabbis know my story. They've read my book. They know my story, and I think at the end of the day, what they appreciate is that they know I'm a defender of the Jewish people and Judaism, and that I've got a journey and I've got a story, and it's complicated, right? But I'm a lot of Jews have complicated stories, just like a lot of Christians do, right?
Right.
And so, to answer your question, it's absolutely not kosher for anybody, Jew or Christian, to go into a Chabad and like start evangelizing or anything like that. And I would never do that. Not even close. But so we're just Jews who are part of the community. We just are part of building up the Jewish community. And again, to the degree that people understand kind of what we do. And, I'm very public, like my podcast, I've had both of my rabbis on my podcast. I've had, all kinds of Jewish leaders and so forth on the podcast. And I think that's because, again, I'm not about, our platform is not about promoting Judaism. It's not about promoting Christianity. It's not about promoting anything in between. It's about promoting building bridges between Jews and Christians.
Yeah.
And our objective is to use, speaking of my wife and I, is to use our expertise in areas of knowledge and experience and passion to do that. And so, so again, that's kind of how that works as far as my own personal life and synagogue involvement.
Have you ever had pushback, maybe when you were younger, like going from Reform to like adopting Christianity or coming to Jesus from your family? Did you ever have?
Yeah, that's a great question, Joshua. Thank you. Because early on, especially, well, first of all, my family was absolutely amazing in how receptive, like how not receptive, that's not the right word, but just accepting, because I was like, again, when I first became a Christian, I was very zealous and I was trying to save everybody and and I was like really, really going for it. And so at that time, it created more tension and stress. And so I definitely got some pushback, because at that point, my theological viewpoint was like, I got to save the Jews, right? I got to evangelize, because if you don't believe in Jesus, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Gentile, whatever, you're going to hell, right? But that's, again, and it just depends how much theology or you want to get in. It's not really even that, but it's not necessarily theology, but I don't hold that viewpoint anymore at all. Like my theology, my way of understanding Paul, the New Testament, all these things, the covenants, it's evolved greatly to where I think Jews are they have an irrevocable, according to Paul, they have an irrevocable covenant with God. And that is for Jews who are, whether they are or are not Christ followers. And so that, again, I think, and again, I see just being a part of Judaism, the Jewish community, I think Judaism is an absolutely beautiful religion, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. And so I see things very differently now than I did back during that era. And again, with all due respect, because I know you've got Christian listeners who would probably be like, yeah, go evangelize them. And I understand that viewpoint. It's just not the way I see it anymore. And I think that, not that Christians shouldn't share their faith, but I just think that, Jews have, I don't promote or encourage evangelizing Jews at all. I think that that's a real problem. And I think that Jews have a covenant relationship with God. And that is, that's extremely important to affirm. And I think that's a big part of Jewish-Christian relations too.
Yep.
What is
so again, that to wrap up the question, because those are my viewpoints, because, it's like, that makes my ability to be a part of the Jewish community that much, I guess, that makes it possible, right? Now, I'm not saying every Jew, you might have some Jewish listeners that are listening. They immediately, as soon as I say, oh, okay, he's Jewish, he has however he's being cute and putting it, he has allegiance to Jesus, they immediately are thinking, oh, he's a Christian. Why doesn't he just come out and write out and say he's a Christian? Or why doesn't he just say he's a Jew for Jesus? Why don't he just say he's a Messianic Jew? Well, because it's more complicated than that. It's not that simple. Again, I'm a Jew. I'm a part of the Jewish community. I keep Torah. I keep kosher. I don't belong to a church. I don't identify with, personally, I respect Christianity and Christians, but that's not my faith. That's not how I see things. And so to just immediately say, you're a Christian, you're a Messianic, whatever, I'm sorry, but that's not being respectful to the nuances and to the to the way things really are on the ground for many people.
Yeah, I think that's too why, I mean, you're a really good testament to why this space matters, and truly knowing people, right? Because you can't just categorize one or the other. And I think there's a lot in society that's kind of gone that route of like, it's either this or that, where really whoever you are, it's nuanced and complicated.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't even ask somebody, in my opinion, or an experience, someone who maybe doesn't claim to believe in any higher power.
Yeah.
I've had people in the past who I've met, as an aside, I was in a hardcore rock and roll band when I was younger, and I would go to all these concerts, right? And it's like it was like there was this time where being in a Christian band, it was like a weird kind of, Joshua knows what I'm talking about. Maybe you do, Ryan, but essentially I met people in those scenes that were like very anti-God, but then when I got to know them a little bit, they were like, they knew more theology than I did. Like they had, and they had, like in their story, and this is 20-something years ago now, but in their story, they got to that point where it's just complicated, and they weren't mean to me because I said, hey, I believe in Jesus Christ as Messiah. Yeah. But it was like, at a young age, it was a wake up call to me to say, hey, I don't actually know everyone's story, and you cannot put them in a category, right? And in your case too, I think it's a beautiful thing that you're able to recognize that and explain it well, and also remind us that this bridge building, dialogue, relations, whatever you want to call it, is really the important part, because you find the humanity in it, and you find the searching and the desire, I think, for connection, right? Within all of it, as opposed to being siloed off, saying I'm one or the other, and I think it's just really cool. And
people, and I do respect, Tommy, that people, like we're humans. We like categories. We like things to be clear. We like to know, okay, this is where this person stands. This is where this person stands. And for me, I can make this very simple, right? I am a Jew. I practice Judaism. I'm part of the Jewish community, and Jesus is part of my journey, and that's how I got here, right? And I maintain an allegiance to Jesus because of that. And so that's it. And I'm into, and what do? I build bridges between Jews and Christians and use that. And so people can, again, I'm not trying to be bottom line or, overly frank, but it's just like, hey, that's my story, man, and people can benefit from that and join with me, or they can just be like, no, sorry, I want things to be, I want to work with people where things are a little more neat, and everybody's got to make their own decisions, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like you could be on either the Meaningful People podcast or the Covenant and Conflict podcast, or both of them. If you know it,
that'd be great.
If our listeners know what that is. Meaningful People is kind of, I would say maybe modern Orthodox, and it's like a lot of people that come to Judaism or return to Judaism.
Yeah.
And then Covenant Conflict is like Gateway Church, Jewish-Christian relations.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Covenant and Conflict. I'm not familiar with the first one, but again, part of it too, Joshua, just along that line, you just kind of made me think of something. Look, the bottom line is that I am so grateful. I love Judaism. Like, I love the Torah, and I love the traditions of the Jewish people and of my people. And so I love halacha, I love Jewish law, and all these things. And guess what? The bottom line is, if not for my journey with Jesus, that's how I got here. That is how I got here, And so it's like, I'm thankful for that. And I think that in many ways, when we really even look at the gospel, again, it was 2,000 years ago in the Galilee, but in many ways, I think, like, I'm like fruit of Jesus's ministry in a sense. I think he wanted to
100%.
see Jews returning to God, to Torah, and to being a part of building up Am Yisrael, the Jewish people. And so here I am.
Jesus made you Jewish.
Yeah, or we could maybe say Jesus made me kosher. Yeah.
Okay, I want to, what is a global game changer? That's in the title of your book.
Oh, yeah.
The Weird Apostle.
Yeah. I use that title to in reference to Paul. So you're referencing my 2024 book, The Weird Apostle. What is it? The subtitle is The Strange Jewish Mission of a Global Game Changer.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, again, Paul is incredible. And so I think that now that folks have heard a little bit of my story, and if you know anything about Paul, you're like, duh, yeah, of course he likes Paul, because you can see maybe some overlap, and so also some real big differences. But anyway, all that to say, I think Paul has, I feel very confident in saying, whether you like Paul or whether you hate Paul, not you guys, but in general, however one feels about Paul, it is very difficult to argue that he was not one of the 15 most influential human beings who's walked planet Earth. I mean, Paul had a massive, Paul in his day, but then of course his letters. I mean, 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament are either, written by, attributed to Paul, obviously half of the book of Acts. So, I mean, Paul is just a huge deal. And as we know, in the Christian church, Paul gets a huge amount of attention. I would say in some way, and I'm saying this as a Paul fan and Paul guy, Paul gets probably a disproportionate amount of attention and focus. More books have been read, or more books have been written on Paul than anybody else. And so, even though Paul's talking about Jesus, and really the way people understand Jesus by and large is through how they understand Paul. That it really is the way it typically works, because Paul gets preached. There's a lot more sermons on Philippians and Romans and books like that than there are on, Mark or Luke. So all that to say, Paul is a hugely influential figure, but I would say at the same time, he is, in my opinion, one of the most misunderstood figures of all time. So so we got one of the most influential and one of the most misunderstood figures all in one character. And so, wow, what a mess. And so I think that there are so many ideas that have been attributed to Paul and that have been promoted or advanced in Paul's name that I think Paul would find deeply problematic. And so, yes, I think he was undeniably a global game changer, in that essentially he was, not the only Jew, but he was certainly, the most famous Jew who was promoting, the Jesus movement beyond the Jewish world, the apostle of the Gentiles. But again, probably even beginning in his lifetime. And we've got some data points in the New Testament that indicate Paul was already being misunderstood and misrepresented. We see that in Acts, and we see that in there's in Second Peter. Peter says, 2 Peter 3:16, there are some things in his letters that are difficult to understand, which the ignorant and unstable twist to their own destruction. So it's even canonized that Paul can be easily twisted. And so that is, and I think that in many ways, Paul has been, the goal wasn't necessarily by anyone to make Paul into a bridge burner between Jews and Christians, but effectively the way Paul has been presented, received, interpreted, and understood, that is the Paul, that is sort of normative. But I think there's I would say there is a more historically probable way of understanding Paul, that, when we put it back in his Jewish and Greco-Roman context, that not only gives us a more accurate, historically likely view of Paul, but that also can have the benefit of forging a better path and a better relationship between Jews and Christians, which I think Paul was very, very interested in.
Okay, so yeah, Paul gets used a lot, like, for example, to speak against things like circumcision, against the Torah. Both of us, we interviewed Dr. Ari Mermelstein. That was our first podcast, and he talked about the Paul within Judaism framework, and we took a class about this, so we are sort of familiar with this. But if you were to say to a Christian or just anyone who says like Paul is anti-Torah or Paul is against circumcision, what would you sort of say, or what data points would you use?
Well, I would sympathize. I would say, when you read Paul's letters, there are some statements that, especially in his letters, Acts, the book of Acts, I think does is, some would even say, and it has been said by some really good scholars like Isaac Oliver and David Rudolph, that, part of Luke's goal in Acts may have even been to correct some misunderstandings about Paul in the direction of, Paul sort of being presented as anti-Torah, anti-circumcision, anti-Jewish, and Acts is wanting to show, wait a second, this guy is really loyal to Torah, to the Jewish people, to Judaism. And so, but that's Acts. But let's just talk about Paul's letters in and of themselves. Look, there are some things, some statements that Paul makes that if you just isolate them, they sound very Torah negative and especially very circumcision negative. And look, if Paul was denigrating circumcision, which is of course, based on Genesis 15, 17, and, multiple other times in the Torah, circumcision is the covenant sign for the covenant that God made with the Jewish people. So ultimately, if Paul is, flattening the significance of circumcision and saying it's not really important anymore for anyone, Jews or Gentiles, well, then you really do have a Paul who has left Judaism and who is now operating outside the realm of Torah. Okay. But, and, again, if there are some statements where he says, like in 1 Corinthians 7, he says, circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing. He makes, statements like, and then, you look in the book of Galatians, we've got some additional, statements that Paul makes that sound very negative towards circumcision. So, but I think that, again, the question is, who is Paul speaking to and what is his point? And I think that the question is not, we have to be just very careful how we frame the question. It's not, was Paul against circumcision? It's, was Paul against circumcision for in Christ Gentiles? Okay. Mm-hmm. So the answer to that, I think Paul was absolutely against circumcision for in Christ or Christ following Gentiles, because effectively that would, that would turn them into Jews. That was what, that's like basically saying, hey, to be, a fully justified, member of the people of God, Gentiles, you need to become Jews. You need to go through proselyte conversion and become a Jew. And I think Paul was making it very clear that Gentiles who had embraced Christ they were fully justified members and they were fully included in the people of God in Christ. Because I think for Paul, one of his fundamental points, we see this in Romans chapter 3, he says, is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not the God of the Gentiles also? Yes, of Gentiles also. So the idea there is that, I think Paul's using kind of drawing on Shema imagery there, the one God type language. And I think for Paul, it would, according to Paul, was, a lot of Paul's ideas were based on, the texts in the prophets like Isaiah and so forth. And when the prophets envisioned the kingdom of God, they envisioned Israel, the Jews, and the nations both giving allegiance, not everybody becoming Jewish or everybody becoming Gentiles, but Israel and the nations worshiping the God of Israel together, going up to Jerusalem, Isaiah 2, and 10 men from the nations taking the guard, as Zechariah 8. Yeah. And so I think for Paul, he knew, look, if this is truly the kingdom of God, then there must be Jews and Gentiles. But if some of Paul's opponents were saying, hey, these Gentiles, they need to go through the process of conversion, proselyte conversion, become ethnic Jews via circumcision, then that undermines what Christ had done to make them these Gentiles fully justified members of the people of God. So again, comes back to the original question, was Paul against circumcision? Kind of misses the question. He was against it for in Christ Gentiles, but he affirms it in the beginning of Romans 3. He says, what value, and when he's talking about, his fellow Jews, what value is there in circumcision? And he says, much in every way. Wow. And we also see in Acts where, Paul is presented as defending, he's accused of in Acts 21 of speaking against circumcision, and he makes it clear that those rumors were not true. So, or at least James does. So all that to say, to answer your question, I understand why some of those accusations it's easy to misread Paul, but it's also pretty easy if we just kind of put him back in his Jewish context and see who he's writing to see that Paul was very much for circumcision, just not for in Christ Gentiles, if that makes sense.
I kind of want to follow up. You mentioned earlier sort of the idea of Jesus as a final sacrifice, and then also the temple sacrifice. And you seem to suggest that those can be parallel. And I'm wondering if you could elucidate that, because I guess the previous medieval Christian notion is that Jesus replaced the animal sacrifices. So maybe you could just illuminate that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. It's a really interesting, it's a big topic, really, really big topic. So we're talking about, how does the New Testament present Jesus as a sacrifice, and how does that relate to the temple system that included sacrifices, right?
Exactly.
And so a couple really important considerations at this point. One, if we look at texts in the Hebrew prophets, so like Ezekiel and Isaiah and Zechariah, when they envision the future messianic era, the kingdom of God, they picture that with a temple and with priests and with sacrifices, and this messianic figure, kind of all those things kind of fit together. Even in Jeremiah, when he talks about, the house of David will never lack, somebody on the throne. I think it's Jeremiah 31 or 33. I'm drawing a blank on it, but it's right in there. The house of David will never lack a man to sit on the throne of David. Very messianic idea. And the Levitical priests will never lack a man to sit, to offer sacrifices. So it kind of pairs the messianic Davidic, office with the Levitical office. And again, you put all those things together and it's like, well, if you're just kind of going off the prophets, it looks like the prophets are envisioning Messiah, messianic era, temple, sacrifices, priests, Levites, all that together. So that's kind of category part one. Part two is that if we look, now we move over to the New Testament, and you've got in the book of Acts, you've got the apostles well after Jesus dies and, his death and resurrection. You have well into the let's just call it the apostolic era. You have those apostles going to the temple and offering sacrifices, right? They're meeting in the temple. They're, and you even have Paul in Acts 21. We have already referenced that text when he is accused of, speaking against Moses and circumcision when he's out in the diaspora. What do they tell him to do to prove that those rumors aren't true? James says, go and these men are under a vow. And that whole procedure that James tells him to do involved sacrifices, including sin sacrifices, chatat sacrifices. So we have that at Acts 21. We have Paul also in Acts 24 talking about, going up to Jerusalem, bringing offerings. He was on it, and he just mentions these things in passing. So it's really interesting. So it's like, were these, is Paul just being naughty? Did he just not, why would Paul, after Jesus, if Jesus is the once for all sacrifice who did away with the need for animal sacrifices, why on earth would we see the apostles having anything to do with the temple? I mean, Jesus did away with that, right? Well, again, I think that this is a very, very big topic, but we can't do away with those texts. So if we just kind of look at the pattern of behavior in the book of Acts, as far as the apostles go, they didn't seem to see any conflict between the sacrificial death of Jesus and what took place in the temple. And I think that, again, I'm going to try to take a really big topic and make it as simple as although this is not simple. And that is the way I understand it. And I think, bringing Hebrews into the equation as well, is that we're talking about two different kinds of atonement here. The sacrifices that the Levitical sacrifices served a particular function for the earthly, the Jerusalem temple, to bring cleansing to the altar, to bring, sort of those sacrifices, and that blood, ritually cleansed the altar in the temple for this world. But the way that Jesus' sacrifice is presented is that it accomplishes something different. It's not the same it's a different kind of atonement. It brings cleansing to people and makes them fit for what Hebrews refers to as the true tabernacle in heaven. So it makes, sort of purifies and cleanses people. So we got sacrifices that are related, but kind of accomplishing different functions. So I think that all that to say, that's one way that I think that we can maybe make sense of the compatibility that seems to be present in the New Testament. And, again, I don't see the apostles as seeing this a conflict between the Levitical sacrifices and what took place in the Jerusalem temple and the sacrifice of Jesus. And that's because they were accomplishing different things in different realms, even though they were related. So that's my best shot at a clear answer to a big question.
Interesting. Because I guess, Hebrews, you do have sort of this idea of a heavenly tabernacle. And some of that kind of builds on sort of Platonic ideas, Plato the philosopher, ideas of Platonic forms in heaven, and everything on earth kind of has a parallel or is a shadow to something above. So maybe there's some connection between what happens on earth and what happens in heaven, like your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Also I think, Joshua, what's really important too is that there's this misconception, I think, especially in Christian theology regarding, Christian understanding regarding the Levitical sacrifices, the Torah, what took place in the temple, atonement, all these things. Like even Yom Kippur, like those things were designated to bring purging for certain things. Like they were not, it wasn't like, there were certain things that even the Levitical sacrifices were not designed to cleanse, like as far as like moral impurities and things like that. I mean, there really isn't a sacrifice. Whenever if you really read Leviticus carefully, you see that you bring a Levitical sacrifice in response to something that is defined, right? Like it's like, hey, if and it's not always for sin. I mean, usually it's not for sin. It's like, hey, if a woman has a baby, there's a purgation offering that has to be brought, or if somebody has sa'arat, which we translate as leprosy, like there's sacrifices associated with that. Again, it's usually there's a specific, it's not, I don't even want to say transgression, but a specific issue that usually involves, death or some kind of contamination or some kind of loss of life that's connected to a sacrifice. Or sometimes it's just, like an olah sacrifice. It's a burnt offering, the most popular offering. It has nothing to do with sin. It has to do with worship and connection and offering, something pleasing to God. So all I to say is that the sacrificial system, the Levitical system, accomplishes certain things to maintain the presence of God on earth. Jesus's sacrifice is designed to do, I think, something different and to bring a moral cleansing to people. And again, I think this is even alluded to in Hebrews 8, that, the blood of bulls and goats could never take away sin. Well, there's a reason for that, because the blood of bulls and goats was not designed to do that. Okay, that's where, sort of the Levitical system, was sort of pointing to something, to this greater cleansing that I think is even alluded to in the prophets. They talk about a day is going to come when God will sprinkle the people and bring cleansing to them. And okay, we're getting into some really thick theology here, I know. And I would encourage folks, if you're like, okay, I'm ready to talk about something else, I understand. But if you really do want to dig into this topic, again, trying to understand, the temple and the sacrifice, I have two books to recommend. One would be Paul Sloan's book. I had Paul Sloan on my podcast, Jesus and the Jewish Law. And then also there's a book by Andrew Rillera called Lamb of the Free. Boy, oh boy, if you want to get deep into, kind of a biblical theology of atonement, and that's another great one.
Awesome. I think it's sort of convenient for the notion that I guess the church replaced Judaism, or church replaced Israel.
Yeah.
Like if let's say Jesus died in AD 30 CE, 30, and then the temple's destroyed in 70, that's 40 years. But I think it's a almost unanimous, but it's a very common notion that because of the connection in time, or because of the proximity in time, that there's a connection, theological connection, or a providential or divine connection, and that it was all that it justified the reason that the temple was destroyed is because it reflected the failure to accept Jesus on behalf of Israel. And then that's sort of carried over into Middle Ages and medieval anti-Judaism,
right?
Reflect on that notion. But you're bringing in more nuance to that.
No, it is, again, it's a big topic, but it's huge because, again, this is a component of replacement theology. And I mean, if you're saying ultimately that, Jesus is the new temple, or the church is the new temple. And again, it's very common. I talk about this in my book a little bit, and I literally heard a Christian teacher talking about this weekend that was basically saying, the church is the new temple. Paul said that. Well, Paul didn't say that. Paul used, look, he was a Jew. He was a Pharisee. Of course, he used temple language as metaphors and analogies, and as he was describing the ecclesia, the what we translate as the church, but the people of God, right? And he's describing them as these vessels of God's presence. Of course, he uses temple language. What else? That's his paradigm and his outlook. But that doesn't mean, just because he marshaled temple imagery to make his points about what God was doing through Jesus among the Gentiles, nowhere does Paul say that the church took the place of, or is now the true spiritual, or anything like that, temple. That is a theological, that is imposing later theology on Paul that I don't think he shared.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I did want to get to, because I want to be respectful of time.
Yeah, and I'm fine, guys. I'm enjoying this. You guys are asking great questions. So
I unfortunately do have a cutoff. But I think it would be awesome, Ryan, if we had you on again to share some more at some point, because I think, yeah. But before that though, obviously, I do want to get, before we end tonight. I'm sorry that I didn't really mention it, but I do have a cutoff.
Yeah, no worries.
And so, but I did want to talk about the last few minutes here with the olive tree campaign, and have you kind of explain, because. So kind of what that is, and I helped in some ways. I'm kind of a part of this bigger the olive tree group. I forget the term we use for it.
Olive Tree Network.
Thank you.
Network. Yeah, you're a part.
So I know you have some big plans. So if you want to explain kind of what that is, where people can find some of the information, also sort of your if you, whatever you want to share, obviously your plan sort of going forward, how that's going to unpack.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. Yeah, I do want to say something about the Olive Tree campaign, which again, folks can learn more about it at the Bridge Builders Forum website. Just click on the tab Olive Tree Campaign. But really, the Olive Tree campaign is a response to a problem. Okay, and the problem being is that there are, as we've said in this conversation, there are many and a growing number of Christians that want to stand, they want to challenge replacement theology, they want to stand against anti-Semitism, they want to stand with the Jewish people. They may not be able to articulate that, they may not be able to they may not understand why, but they just sense something, and they just know that that's important, and to varying degrees, they may be able to explain that to some level and use some of the same terms. But the bottom line is, a lot of Christians struggle to explain that and to have a clear language for expressing that support. And so because of that, and also because of again the increase in anti-Semitism, and also the division within the church regarding Israel and the Jewish people and replacement theology, we saw a real problem, and that there's a great need for just Christians in pulpits and pews to have greater clarity and language to learn how to, again, do those things and to make those stands. So we being the Bridge Builders Forum, I got a team of people together to help me create and Jewish thinkers, Christian thinkers. Tommy, you were one of the early reviewers of it, because again, you're doing such great work and have a passion for this on the ground. But I've got a range of people in pulpits and pews, scholars, everything in between, on both the Jewish and Christian side. And all that to say, we created this campaign that centers around these 10 affirmations. We call them the olive tree affirmations, and we're basing it on Paul's olive tree metaphor, which is another huge component of Paul's right at the heart of Romans. But I think that in many ways, the olive tree, the way that Paul's olive tree teaching has been understood, in a lot of ways, it has perpetuated replacement theology as opposed to, I think what Paul really intended was to cultivate, to use a, an agricultural term. I think he was trying to cultivate, especially to inspire Gentile Christ followers to have a humble, merciful posture towards the Jewish people and towards Judaism. So that's sort of the metaphor and the teaching and the text that inspires the Olive Tree campaign, informs it. So we developed 10 olive tree affirmations that are basically just very easy, one-liner kind of ideas, but then each affirmation has an explanatory paragraph. But here's the thing. There have been lots of efforts through the years, as I've already alluded to, the 10 points of Salisbury, Nostra Aetate. There's been statements on the Jewish and Christian sides that have tried to provide clarity and, kind of a rallying call. But unfortunately, a lot of those efforts, which we've sort of really looked at and tried to build upon, a lot of those efforts stayed either at the academic level or at the high denominational level. And a lot of people in pulpits and pews don't have some of those older statements. They don't even know they exist. So the Olive Tree campaign has, we really have designed it, for the Christians in our audience, to have these 10 anchor statements. But here's what we've done. As you know, Tommy, we've created a course, or we're in the process of creating the Olive Tree course, which unpacks the affirmations that you can do together as a group. We have the Olive Tree book that is in the process of being made. We have an entire network that meets monthly, which folks can sign up for now on our website. We have a monthly meeting called the Olive Tree Network meeting. And so all of these, this is a multi-component, almost like an ecosystem that is really seeking to, again, help Christians to understand what it means to stand against replacement theology, against anti-Semitism, and with the Jewish people. And very importantly, as that happens, not only does it improve the relationship between Jews and Christians, it really, I think, at its core, also helps the church regain an aspect of its own understanding that has been missing for 2,000 years. Again, this comes back to something we said very early in this conversation, that to the degree that the church does not have a healthy relationship with Jews and Judaism, it's to that degree, it is not being all that it can be to flourish. So there's a lot of reasons why this Olive Tree campaign is moving forward. And so again, folks can learn more about it on the website. I'm grateful for your help, and thanks for letting me share just about it for a moment here.
Yeah, and I wanted to add really quick something that I think wasn't always on my mind, but we've made pretty clear in the network meetings, is people who are listening to this or watching this, there's not necessarily, like, a lot of the people in that network have affiliation or some sort of interaction with Jews, but this is for any Christian as well, right?
Yeah,
you don't have to necessarily know. It's really kind of for the person who wants to see, like you said, a different framework of Christianity and have this brought in. So it doesn't necessarily need to be, if someone's listening, that's like, well, I don't really know Jews, or I don't really have them in my network, or even where they live potentially, right? They may not know
Tommy,
small towns, wherever. But that's a big component, I think, that that is really important to note as well. So it's for either one, right? So people who are definitely involved, know people, and people who don't as well.
Tommy, thank you for pointing that out. And yeah, we talked about that during the last network meeting, how important that is, because anywhere that replacement theology and anti-Judaism exists within the church, it is hurting and contaminating the church, right? So that's why, even if they're, if it's a Christian or a Christian community that's in an area, like you said, where there are no Jews, the Olive Tree campaign is still for them, because it's going to help to root out maybe some ideas that are present that are hindering their understanding of their faith as well. So thanks for pointing that out, because that is a very important part of this.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I gotta cut off. So I'm sorry we have to end. I wish we could keep going throughout the night.
We'll do it again.
Yeah, but Ryan, where can people find you? I know bridgebuildersforum.com. Is there anything else you want to plug before we end this here for you?
No, that's great. Bridgebuildersforum.com is a great place. You can sign up for our weekly email that, just kind of keeps you in the loop. We offer a lot of ongoing learning opportunities, connection opportunities. Also, probably our YouTube page, that's where you can follow our podcast, the Bridge Builders Forum podcast. We have a lot of Jewish and Christian guests. Again, everything is about helping Jews and Christians better understand their faith, the Bible, and each other. But yeah, the website, the YouTube page, and you can send me a note through there too, and I'll respond. So yeah,
nice. This has been very eye-opening and very enlightening for me, and just hearing your story especially has been very influential, and I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And I think also I want to plug your podcast. I think it's a great podcast. I love every time I see it. I just come up. I try to listen as soon as I can.
Oh, thanks.
So again, thank you, and we'll see you soon. Huh?
Sounds great. Let's do it again, guys.
Okay. See you again.